Okay, good morning. Today's daf is daf Kaf Aleph in Masechah Chullin. We are at the top line of daf Kaf Aleph. Let me share my screen and we'll get started. I saw, just as we're getting started, I saw one of the nice summaries of today's daf that I occasionally have a chance to look at. Note that today is about the concept of mostly dead, that you may remember from the movie The Princess Bride, where Miracle Max tells Inigo Montoya that his friend is only mostly dead, not completely dead, and so as a result, there's a possibility of saving him. We're gonna You'll see as we go through today's daf that in fact that is a relevant thought for today's daf. As we go through, you can keep that in mind, and hopefully that will help with the entertainment associated with today's daf. Yesterday, we ended with a cliffhanger on Daf Kaf Amabet. We saw the following statement that Ze'iri said that if the neck is broken and most of the flesh is broken with it, it's a nevela, meaning that the animal is already dead. And so Rava asked, based on that statement, if Ze'iri is right, well, that would undermine the entire concept of Malika. Because what happens in Malika? The Kohen who is killing the bird uses his thumbnail to break through the neck from the back, severing the spine, and breaking the neck, and presumably cutting the flesh on top of the neck. And then, after doing that, because this is the order of the pipes that one or the things that one encounters if one begins at the back of a bird's neck, and then the Kohen will encounter the trachea and or the esophagus, and whichever one he cuts, because a bird only requires the cutting of one, so then that would be the slaughter. But the issue is, by the time one gets to cutting the trachea or esophagus, the animal is considered dead based on what Ze'iri said. So what is he doing? Meaning the animal's dead already. There's no Malika any longer. So as we pick up on the top line of Kaf Aleph Amid Aleph, Rava offers his answer to the question. So, Amar Rava, Ema v'chein hu oseh, maybe we can say that this is what he does. Chosech shidra, he breaks the neck, he breaks the spine, umafrekes, breaks the spinal cord and the neck below rov basar, without breaking the majority of the flesh that's on top of it. And what did Ze'iri say? Ze'iri said that you need both the neck to be broken and most of the flesh above it to be torn. If it's only one without the other, then the animal is not considered dead. So that is our answer, and that is one of the reasons we've seen over the last few Masechtot. I think it was back in Zvachim, but it might have been in Menachot, where we saw that one of the hardest jobs that a Kohen has to do is Malika. And it might not actually sound that hard because heck, you may have a good nails, and so as a result you're able to do the cutting. But now we can understand why it's so difficult. You need to cut in a particular manner. You need to break the neck without sort of cutting through all of the skin and all of the flesh that is on top of the neck. And then you need to cut at least one of the trachea or esophagus before the neck flesh itself is broken. And that's because that'll be when the animal is considered dead. And so as a result, that makes it more difficult. Now, it is not just Rava who said this. Kisolik Rabbi Zera, so when Rabbi Zera went to Israel, he saw that Rabbi Ami was sitting and talking about this matter. So Amrle, he asked the same question that Rava asked. Well, 1 second. When you've got this dead bird, does it make any sense to stand up and do Malika? So Rabbi Ami was quiet for a moment. As Rashi tells us, Eshtomem shasak v'haya machashev mayaneh. He was thinking about what he should answer. Now, and then Amar Lay. So now it's unclear whether this Amar Lay is now Rabbi Ami or Rabbi Zera. You can read it in both directions. In any event, Amar Lay, maybe you could say this is how he does it, and it's exactly what Rava answered. Chosek shidra umafrekes below Rav Basar. He cuts the spinal cord and the neck without cutting the most of the flesh. And so above the, on the back of the neck. So Tanyanami Haki. And moreover, we even have a brisa that says this. What's the brisa? So Ketzan Molkin Chatas Ha'of. How do you do Malika on a bird Chatas? Chosech Shidra Umafrekas below Rav Basar. You cut the spine and the neck without cutting also the most of the flesh that's on top of it. Ad Shemagia Lavesht Olakana, until you get to either the esophagus or the trachea. Higia Lavesht Olakana, and then once you've gotten there, well, then chosek siman echad o rubo. You can cut most of it or one of one of it or most of it. Rov basarimo, and with it you can also do the flesh of the neck bone, and so as a result, the animal will then be considered dead. Uva ola shnayim o rov shnayim, and when it comes to an ola, you need to cut two pipes or most of two pipes. Okay, so that's great. We've now shown that Rava's answer is the right answer, but Mani, who is this Baraisa like? Irabanan, if it's like the rabbis. Now remember, there is a machlokas, and we will get to a quote of that machlokas, quote of a long brisa with this machlokas very shortly, but there is a machlokas that we've seen already over the last few days, and we will see again inside very shortly, where the rabbis say that when you cut the two pipes for an olas ha'of, you need to cut them completely. Whereas Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon says, no, you need to cut them mostly. But here we said both possibilities. Uva ola shnayim o rov shnayim. You need to cut both or all or most of both. So mani Rabbanan, who is this? Is if it's the rabbis, ha amri shnayim dafka. They say you need to cut both pipes, all of them, not most of them. So the o rov shnayim doesn't fit. And Ika Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, Hamar Roshnayim. Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, says, no, you're supposed to cut the majority of them, but not all of them. And because, again, in general, we don't want to cut the head off of the animal. And effectively, if you cut the two pipes, that is considered like cutting off the entire head. If you cut the two pipes completely. So that if you cut both the esophagus and the trachea. So how do we answer this? Because this brisa now doesn't fit with either of the opinions. So ema shnayim l'rabanan. You can say that what it means is that the two are according to the rabbis. Rov shnayim l'Rabbi Elazar b'Rabbi Shimon, and the majority is when you talk about is according to Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon. And what we're saying is the following: Uba ola, and when it comes to the ola, Shnayim according to the rabbis, and Orov Shnayim according to Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. So v'ibayasem, or you could say, you know what? Hava ha Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. When we say both two and the majority of two, we're talking about Rabbi Elazar, the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Shimon. And you're going to ask me, Umay Shnayim, what do you mean by two? Because that would be inconsistent with Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Shimon. Shedomim l'Shnayim. What it means is that if it's comparable to two, meaning that it's almost entirely two. And Rashi explains what we mean here. So take a look at Rashi. This is hold on. Shadomim l'shnayim. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 lines down. End of the line in the narrow lines of Rashi on Kaf Aleph Amud Aleph. Shedomim l'shnayim delichatchila be'inan sheyichtoch rov lahedja sheyehei nira le'einayim shehu rov. So the idea of saying shnayim is that it needs to be a majority that is a clear majority to one's eye. So as a result, one will give it credit as if one has torn both of them. And then what does it mean by O Rov Shnayim? So continuing in that Rashi, O Rov Shnayim, Va'afilu Rov Mitzumtzam, that even if you just have 50.00001%, continuing with the O's, then in fact you would just, that would be sufficient as well, even though it looks like exactly half. And so as a result, in both of those cases, it will be okay. And so that is what this brisa is saying. And so the brisa is just following Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon. Okay, so we have these answers. Having discussed a broken neck for an animal, we get a similar statement for a person and other statements regarding what damage is sufficient to consider a person or animal to be dead. So Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel Nishbara Mafrekes V'Rov Basar Ima Metame Ba'ohel. So if you have something with a broken neck and most of the flesh on the neck is broken as well, well then it will cause tuma through a roof. Now, clearly this has to be a human because the only thing that causes tuma, that is if you're in the same room with it or in the same building with it, is a human's. And so as a result, Rashi highlights this by noting next Rashi, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 lines down in the Rashi, beginning of the line, end of the line, Nishbara Mafrekas, down onto the 15th line. But Adam, we're talking about a human flesh, human whose neck has been broken and whose flesh is with it, and the flesh that's associated with it. So mitame bo'ol, so it's going to create tuma in the same room, in the same tent. It's going to convey tuma even without touching. V'im tomar, 1 second, you might ask yourself, hey, what about the following story from Shmuel Aleph, Perek Dalid, Pasuk Yud Chet, with the story, also Maisa de Eli, that when you have the story of Eli the Kohen, Mafreket below Rov Basar Havai, that he was sitting and he broke his neck without most of the flesh, because the pasuk tells us, as Rashi highlights in the next Rashi, V'im Tomar. This is now about 16 lines down. V'im Tomar ha Eli mafrekas below Rov Basar. He broke his neck without most of the flesh. Hava, that's the case. The Kari lay mace, and yet he was called dead. And after all, it said, because what did the pasuk say? As we are going to quote it in a moment, v'tishaver mafrakto vayamot, that he broke his neck and he died. So doesn't that show that you don't need the flesh as well? And now we're going to answer. So back into the Gemara. So we are 1, 2. It's the last word on the line. 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18 lines down in the Gemara. Zikna, shiny. If you're an old person, that's different. In an old person, breaking the neck alone will be sufficient. Tiksiv, vayehi kahazkiru es Aron ha'elokim vayipol that when he was told about the what happened to the Aron of God, vayipol me'al hakisei achoranit, he fell back off of his chair. Ba'ad yad hashar, right next to the gate. V'tishaver mafrakto, and he broke his neck. Vayamot, and he died. Kizakein ha'ish v'chaved, because he was old and heavy. So the bottom line is that the point of why is it mentioning that he was old? It is to tell you that that's why breaking the neck without the flesh of was sufficient to kill him. And so as a result, that is not inconsistent with our story. So Amar Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani Amar Rabbi Yochanan Kra'o Kedag, if a person is torn up like a fish, meaning that in order to pull out the spine of the fish, one creates a tear in the back of the fish in order to pull it all out. Mitame ba'ohel, that person is also considered dead already and is going to create tuma within the same roof. And the Rashi adds, next Rashi, ba'afilu mifraches, even if he is still convulsing, that is going to, the person is considered dead. And Amar Rabbi Shmuel Bar Yitzchak Umi Gabo. And when we say this, we're talking about only if one slits the person all along his back. If it's in the front, well, then that is not necessarily going to be causing the death, and so as a result, that is not necessary. We do not treat that person as if they are already dead. Okay, Amar Shmuel, Asa Gistera. If you did a Gistera, which sort of literally means a mutilation, Nivela, that's a Nivela. And Rashi tells us that actually Gistera is a more specific kind of mutilation, Asa Gistera, Shechatcha Lirachba O Bitsavara Kulo. Either you slice the person into two pieces, either across, in its lengthwise or widthwise, or its neck, o bishidra, or its spine, ad hachalal, until the cavity, meaning until the stomach cavity, kol davar hachaluk l'shnaim, any kind of situation where you cut something in two, kari gistera. That is referred to as gistera. So again, that is going to be a nevela. That's going to be a situation. Now we're talking obviously back to the animal situation, and so that is the ruling that Shmuel has. Amar Rabbi Lazar, it goes even further. You don't even have to do that. Nital hayarech v'chalal shala. If you v'chalal shala nikar. If you remove a thigh and now the cavity, although it's not explicit, although the word is in parentheses, I'm going to read it with it because it's a little bit clearer as to what's talking about. And seems to be how Rashi understands what's going on, as we'll see in just a moment. If you remove the thigh and the cavity is visible, meaning the stomach cavity is visible, then nevela, that is considered a dead animal. So what is that talking about? So nitel hayerech mimakom chiburo babuka de'etame. That if in fact you remove the leg completely from the place where it is attached to the leg, hip area, then the animal, then it's going to cause tuma immediately. Hechi dami chalal shala nikar. What do we mean by the cavity is visible? Amarava kolsha revutza v'niras chasera. That anytime it is crouching and you can still tell that the animal is missing the leg, then that is going to be considered the situation where the cavity is visible. And why do I say that? Because the point is, and Rashi goes through this in a little bit more detail. Well, actually, we can go to it directly. Now we're at Rashi 3, from the bottom of the narrow lines of Rashi, about 22, 24, 24 lines up or so, maybe 21 lines up. Kolsha revutza v'niras chasera derech habehema lirvots al yirecha. It is customary that the animals will crouch on their thighs, meaning crouch on their thighs. Umit yirecha b'revitzita, and you won't be able to tell if you think about sort of a lion crouching. Maybe if you think about the Sphinx, you can't really see its legs at all. So v'im niras, if in that crouching position you can see chesrona, that there is something missing to the animal, when it is crouching like that, well, then that is the situation that we're talking about. Okay, so back into the Gemara. So Tanan Hasam, we learned over there. We are now where is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 lines up from the bottom of the Gemara. Tanan Hasam, Hutzu Rashehen, if the head is cut off, Af al Pisha even though it is still convulsing, Tmeim, then it creates Tuma. Kiznav haluta'ah shemifar keses, because it's like a lizard's tail, which continues to convulse even after it's been cut off. So my hutsu, what do we mean by cut off? Meaning, is it the entire head? Is it just part of the head? So Reish Lakish Amar hutsu mamish. We mean fully cutting off. Now, here we are going to clarify a couple of things. First of all, Rashi here says Hutsu Rashehen. Rashi says it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 lines up in Rashi. Hutsu Rashehen. Bishmona Shuratzim Kamairi Beseder Taros. We're talking about when you have a cut off head of one of the 8 kinds of shrutzim, 8 kinds of creepy crawly creatures. That's what we're talking about. Now, Tosos immediately points out that is not the case. If you take a look at that Mishnah, this is a Mishnah in Oalot, Mishnah Perek Aleph, Mishnah Vav, and it says there, it seems there it's not talking about, because Tosos tells us in the second Tosos, Gabi Behema Chai Ba'of, it's talking about all kinds of larger animals, not shrutzim. Below gabi shrutzim to the parish countries. It's not talking about creepy crawly things, as Rashi tells us. And now, on the other hand, Rashi makes sense because we already learned a rule about breaking necks with respect to other larger animals. That was the rule that Zeiri said at the very beginning of today. And so in order to have this rule be about something new, Rashi is saying that that line in the Mishnah over there in Olot is not talking about a situation of the head being cut off, but rather a different situation completely. Talking because it's by changing the nature of the animal. Whereas Tosos is going to say, no, we're talking about the same thing, and maybe it even disagrees with Zeiri, as we will see in just a moment. So, Ma'u Hutsu, what do we mean by Hutsu? So, again, Reish Lakish Amar Hutsu Mamish, it means completely cut off. And so, if the head is completely cut off, that means cutting the spine and cutting the 2 pipes, namely the esophagus and the trachea. And now, Hutsu Mamish, third Tosos on the Daf, Kaf Alpha Mdalf, Nira Depligi as Zeiri. This would seem to disagree with Zeiri. De La'el, De Sagi Lepim Mafreket, Vero Basar Lachud. It would seem that it's sufficient to just have cut the spine along with the majority of the flesh on it. And this seems to be more. Now, you don't have to say that. You could say that we're talking about, for example, if you do shechita from the front and you cut the 2 pipes and the spine, and you didn't cut the flesh that's on the top of the spine. But in any event, it seems like Tosos certainly thinks that Reish Lakish, if we say that this is talking about a larger animal, would disagree with Zeiri. Rabbi Asi Amar Rabbi Yamani Bahavdala Olas Ha'of. No, we're talking about the separation necessary for an Olas Ha'of. So Amar Le Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabbi Asi. So Rabbi Yirmiyah asked Rabbi Asi, according to who? We've seen these 2 opinions. We've seen the opinion of the Rabbanan. Kavdala Olas Ha'of Rabbanan. Below Palgisu, are you talking about the doing the separation of an ola of a bird ola? In which case you're really not arguing at all because you're saying cutting everything, and that would because according to the rabbis you need to cut both the esophagus and the trachea, and so as a result we're really the same thing as Reish Lakish. Below Palgisu, and so therefore you don't disagree with them. Oh, Dilma Kahabdallah, Kabdalas, Olas Ha'of, Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon, Ufal Gisu. Or are you taking the position of an olas ha'of according to the Rebbe Elazar, the son of Rebbe Shimon, who says that all you need to do is sever most of those pipes, and therefore that would be your argument with Reish Lakish. So Amar Lei, so he responds, Kahavdalas Olas Ha'of Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. No, I think that we're talking about the separation of an Olas Ha'of, of a bird Ola, according to Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Shimon, Upalginan. And so as a result, we do argue it. We argue with Reish Lakish. Ika Amri. Others say that we didn't have this question and answer, this last question and answer, but rather Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Amar Hutzu Mamish, Rabbi Yasi Amar Rabbi Mani, Kahavdalas Olas Ha'of Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon Barov Shnayim. That Rabbi Asi, when he said what Rabbi Mani said, it was explicitly referencing Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, and so it was clear from the very beginning that he argues with Reish Lakish. Okay, and so as a result, now that we've quoted several times the machlokas between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon. So my Rabbanan and my Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, what's the story with that? Where did we have this machlokas? Titania, it was in the following brisa. V'es hasheni ya'aseh ola kamishpat. The Torah says, this is Vayikra, Perek Hey, Pasuk Yud, where it says the second bird is going to be an ola according to the law. So, right, this is talking about the variable chatas, the korban ola v'yored, and the middle level, which involves a bird. And so, as a result, one of them is going to be brought as a chatas, and the other is going to be brought as an ola. And it says ola kamishpat. So, what does it mean by kamishpat? So, kamishpat chatas habehema. It means based on the law of an animal chatas. So ata omer kamishpat chatas behema. 1 second, you're telling me that the kamishpat is like a chatas of a behema, but how do I know that you don't mean a chatas? Oh, eno elach kamishpat chatas haof. The context might suggest that it means like the law of the chatas of the oaf, which is what we're talking about just earlier in that pasuk. No, it can't mean that, because kashahu omar v'hikrivo, when it says in in Perek Aleph pasuk tesvav, when it's talking about the olas ha'of, where it's talking about the olas ha'of on its own, where one were to bring just an olas ha'of, so then it says v'hikrivo, a person's going to bring it. And that implies that it has a different law. So that pasuk is teaching that the laws associated with a bird chatas are different from the laws associated with the bird aola. And so as a result, how can we now say umani mikayim kamishpat? So as a result, when it says kamishpat in Perek Hey, what does it mean? It means kamishpat chatas behema. It means like the law of a chatas of an animal. So ma chatas behema eina ba'a, as we turn to kaf aleph amud bet, eina ba'a elamin achulin. Just as, and we're going to learn 3 laws associated this, that when it comes to an animal chatas, you have to bring it from chulin, meaning Rashi tells us element of chulin v'lo mimos meiser sheni. You can't use meiser sheni money. Ulakaman yalef labachatas gufa minalan. We're eventually going to ask the question: well, how do you know that a chatas can't involve meiser sheni money? But we'll answer that later. But right now we're learning from chatas to a large chatas animal to the olas ha'of that you cannot use meiser sheni money. And on some level, it makes total sense, right? Because meiser sheni money is meant to be eaten, and this olas ha'of is not going to get eaten. But in any event, uvayom, back into the Gemara top line on Kaf Aleph Amud Bet, that it also tells us that you have to bring it during the daytime, just as the chatas, a behemoth chatas needs to be brought during the daytime, so too the olas ha'of needs to be brought during the daytime. Uviado ayimanit, and when you do the sprinkling, you need to use your right hand. Af olas ha'of eino ba elamin achulin ubayom uviado hayaminit. And so as a result, the same 3 rules also apply to olas ha'of. Okay, but 1 second. Imala halan barov shnayim avkan barov shnayim. Well, 1 second. What's the law associated with an animal chatas or any animal slaughter? You have to slice the majority of the two pipes. So why don't you say that you also have to slice the majority of the two pipes here, naming the esophagus and the trachea? Talmud Lomar umalak vehiktir. The pasuk says that, and this pasuk is Perek Aleph Pasuk Tesvav. Also in that same pasuk that we were quoting earlier, right? The entire pasuk says V'hikrivo hakohen el hamizbech umalak es rosho v'iktir hamizbecha v'nimtza damo al kir hamizbech. So the point is umalak v'hiktir are two verbs used in immediate consequence, even if they're not right next to each other. And so as a result, we are creating a hekesh, a connection between malika and burning. And so ma hakatara harosh be'atzmo v'aguf be'atzmo, just as when you do the haktara, the body is burned separately from the head. Af malika harosh ba'atzmo v'aguf ba'atzmo. So too, the malika, it needs to be done separately, the head by itself and the body by itself. And so as a result, this is the rabbi's position. And I should have well, all right. And so as a result, the point is, take a look at Rashi. We're in now the wide lines at the bottom of Rashi, 9 lines down. Or 8 lines down, end of the line. Af malikas olas ha'ov harosh ba'atzmo v'hainu shnayim. And so this is the basis of the rabbi saying that you need to cut both the trachea and the esophagus. V'afilu mechuber ba'or. Even if the skin is still attached, havdalah chashiva, it is still considered a separation. Keda'amr le'el, as we saw earlier. Tebemulika kasav rachmana hach havdalah. That when it talks about malika, we saw that you need to have this kind of separation. Umalika keshchita, and malika is just like slaughtering. V'chol sheyeshno b'shchita yeshno b'havdalah, and we saw that whatever you have to engage in with respect to slaughtering, then you have to also engage with respect to the concept of Havdalah. V'or she'ein shchita nizkeret, and when it comes to the skin, which nizkeret bo, where there's no reference to having to cut the skin in connection with the shchita, so as a result, Havdalah nami lo ma'akiv. So too, when it comes to Havdalah, you don't have to actually have separated the skin itself. And so therefore, that is what the rabbis say. This is the position that requires and olas ha'of requires both the cutting of the trachea completely and the cutting of the esophagus completely. Rabbi Yishmael Omer, a position that we have not yet seen, which is effectively in agreement with our Tanakama, except that they have different sources for things. Kamishpat, what does it mean by kamishpat? Kamishpat chatas ha'of. It doesn't mean chatas behema, it means chatas ha'of. Ma chatas ha'of mimul oref, just as the chatas ha'of, when it gets malika is done on it, it is from the back. Af olas ha'of mimul oref. So too, the malika of the ola bird is also from the back of the neck. So imala halan molek ve'eno mabdel b'simon echad. But 1 second, malika of a chatas only requires the breaking of one of the pipes, the separating of one of the pipes. So afkan molek ve'enu mavdel b'siman echad, it should be sufficient over here as well. So Talmud lomar v'hikrivo. That's why it says v'hikrivo, to tell us that the olas ha'of has its own, in Perek Aleph Pasuk Tesvav, it tells us that it has its own law that is not necessarily the same law, that is different from the law of the chatas. And while the chatas, you only have to cut one, and in fact are not even allowed to cut the second, when it comes to the ola, you have to cut them both. And so again, that doesn't disagree with the rabbis, but it gives a different source. And now we get to the relevant piece for the Ar Machlokas, namely Rebbe Elazar Rabbi Shimon. Rebbe Elazar Rabbi Shimon Omer, as we're on now the last line on Kaf Aleph Amabet, Kamishpat, Kimishpat Chatas Ha'of. It means Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon agrees with Rabbi Yishmael, and what it means is that it's like the law of the bird chatas, malahalan, as we turn to Kaf Aleph Amud Bet, Kaf Bet Amud Aleph, Ochas Birosh Ubaguf Umazeh. That just as when it comes to the chatas, you have to hold the bird and its head all at the same time, and you sprinkle the blood or you spray the blood onto the mizbeach. Avkan ochas berosh ubaguf umazeh. So too, when it comes to the olas ha'of, you're going to hold the head and the body at the same time and do the sprinkling. So my kamar, what is the point of this? We interrupt the brisa and ask the question. Haki kamar. Here's what it's trying to say. Malahalan keshu achos harosh beguf harosh beguf. Just as over there in the case of a chatas ha'of, the neck and the body. I'm sorry, the head and the body are still connected, and mazeh, and we do the sprinkling. Avkan kishu achos harosh beguf. When one still has the head as part of the body, mazeh, you do the sprinkling also for olas ha'of. So as a result, so now we go back into the quoting of the brisa. Imala halan b'simen echad. Avkan b'simen echad. Oh, so maybe you'll say that just as in connection with the chatas, you only break one pipe and you do not break two pipes. So too, maybe you would break one pipe and not two pipes. Talmud lomar v'hikrivo. You actually have to have v'hikrivo. You bring it near, meaning that it has a different law from it, meaning the olas ha'of has a different law from the chatas ha'of, and so as a result, while the chatas ha'of you only break one pipe and not two, here you have to break both pipes, and this is again the position of Rabbi Elazar Rishim. Sorry, I didn't scroll. This is the position of Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, and the point is that we have this obligation to cut the majority of both pipes, but we should not cut both pipes, because if you cut both pipes, that is considered as if the head is already separated, and so and we need the head not to be separated, and so that's why we are going to say that that in fact there is Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon's position is you need to cut the majority, but not completely. You need to cut the majority of both the trachea and the esophagus, but not cut both of them completely. And that brings us now, having cited this brisa in which the rabbis and the son and Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, argue, the Gemara wonders about the position of the rabbis and the Tanakama. But for that discussion, you'll need to stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. Wishing you a Chag Sameach. Tomorrow we will learn an hour before Mincha. Mincha is at 7:30, so we will be learning at 6:30 in the lobby of HIR. If you can make it, that would be wonderful. Looking forward to learning together, God willing, tomorrow. Wishing everybody a very Chag Sameach, a wonderful Chag Sameach, and happy to be continuing our learning together.
Chag Sameach.